Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly. Second work session regarding AO 2022-104, acquisition of 716 West 4th Avenue. It is Friday, March 10, 2023. We are scheduled from 11:50 a.m. until 12:50 p.m. It's 11:54. Documents for this work session are available at muni.org. I think, would someone please mute? If folks on the phone could please mute. Thank you. Documents for this work session are available at muni.org/work sessions. We'll go ahead and start with Assembly member introductions for the record.
Joey Sweet.
I saw Ms. Quinn Davidson. Are you in here? Ms. Quinn Davidson is here. Suzanne LaFrance, and on the phone, Mr. Constant.
Here.
Ms. Dern.
Here.
Mr. Solt.
Here.
Mr. Boland.
Here.
Thank you. And we are joined by Assembly Counsel Dean Gates, as well as other Assembly branch staff and members of the administration. If you all would go ahead and state your names as well.
Mike Robbins, Executive Director for Anchorage Community Development Authority.
Courtney Peterson, Office of Management and Budget.
Adam Trombley, Chief of Staff.
Grant Trinka, CFO.
Dee Ennis, Contract Attorney for the Assembly.
And also,
Ben Bowman, Assistant Municipal Attorney.
thank you. And thank you all for being here today for this second work session. I want to note that the original version of AO 2022-104 has been distributed, as well as an S version, a substitute version. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Robbins.
Thank you, Chair LaFrance. At the last Assembly meeting, there was a request made for ACDA to explain in a small detail what the funds from this transaction that will go to ACDA are going to be used for. And so my presentation today is going to specifically stick to those issues. So I'll just start out by saying that, as I said, the 716 building sale will allow us to continue to advocate for development, develop partnerships, and execute P3 projects across the municipality. We have some projects in process that will be affected by this transaction. We're in the process of starting a real estate market conditions housing incentive study that will look at what's being done mainly outside in the rest of the country in terms of incentives to try to stimulate housing development. We have an economic development tax legislation that we're working on right now in Juneau that's been sponsored by Senator Dunbar and Senator Clayman in the Senate, as well as Rep. Sumner, that's going to provide some relief or give the Assembly and the municipality more options to be able to put together some incentives.
And if I could just pause a moment to note, we've been joined by Mr. Rivera. Thanks.
Thank you. And then feasibility study for the downtown rental car and mobility center. Projects underway currently is the Block 96 flats. This money will be used. ACDA had to contribute $1.8 million to this project. So the funds that we'll be receiving from this will help replenish some of that cash that we expended. The 6th Avenue Hotel, of course, is underway, and there's going to be all kinds of expenses associated with that this funds will be used for. And then the D Street redevelopment project is underway. We're in the process of completing the D Street district study, which encompasses that area that's on the screen there, as well as the purchase of the JCPenney garage and the development of Block 102.
If folks on the phone could please mute. Sorry, Mr. Robbins. Please make sure your phone is muted. Thank you.
May I ask a question, Madam Chair?
Of course.
Sure, go ahead, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thanks. And thanks, Mr. Robbins. Could you remind me what the proceeds from the sale are? expected to be?
It's going to be roughly over just a little over $5 million.
Okay,
Like
And-
5 million, maybe like less than 5,100,000 right now.
got it. Okay, and so all of these projects, like the 8th and K project, the ACDA did the garage or the underground parking portion, right? And
Correct. And so we were obligated to contribute $1.8 million, which we did last summer, which brought ACDA below its board mandated cash reserve.
Okay.
So this will help us. There's just about $500,000 of that to get back to our board mandated reserves.
great. And then the other project you mentioned was the hotel, 6th Avenue Hotel, which I guess we've talked about a lot over the years, but not recently. What's going on with, I don't want to get you too far astray, but just in terms of how you would use some of this money for that project?
So there's a couple of different factors that will go into this. One of them will be the relocation of transit into a semi-permanent location before there's a lot of moving parts there, as you probably know. But that'll be in the neighborhood of, $100,000 or $150,000 that'll be used for that. And then those other will be associated costs. It's hard to know exactly by the time they finish their CUP and all these other expenses that come up. But I'm estimating that's going to cost us at least another $150,000 to $250,000 to finish this project on the ACDA side.
So that's like kind of maybe 750 we're at so
Correct.
far. And then you would put the remaining funds or some of those remaining funds into this project?
Well, some of the remaining funds, we're not going to have to fund all of this project. We'll just need seed money for this. So the purchase of the JCPenney garage is $1 million.
Okay.
And then it's going to have to be demolished as well
Mhm.
and removed. And then the Block 102 project, I estimate, we've set it, we're going to set aside $1 million for that development.
What's Block 102? Can you
Block
remind me?
102, if you have in the updated My Downtown plan, it's a development of it's a mixed-use development with up to 180 multifamily units, as well as some retail and some condominiums that's going to take place. We've arranged a land trade between the state and the muni for that property. That's currently state property, but we're in the process working with HLB to trade land, and then we'll acquire the land from HLB through some sort of purchase or some
Great.
sort of arrangement. So that is a housing development. And then along with that, we're doing a D Street redevelopment plan. Since we're going to have anchors at both sides of D Street, we thought, why not look at the whole area and see if we could redevelop it in some way. As you know, Roger Brooks, during his presentation, said that one of the things we have to do is eliminate all of this sort of blank surface parking to have a real vibrant downtown. And as you can see, if you look at that picture, it's parking lot, parking lot, parking lot, parking lot. I mean, it's just nothing but parking lots that are underutilized. So.
Got it. Thanks, Madam Chair, for letting me ask all those questions. It's been a while since we've checked in, so
For
that's
sure.
exciting. Thanks.
Sure. I want to note for the record, we were joined by Mr. Cross at about noon.
One of the other exciting projects that we're working on, actually at the suggestion of Assemblymember Constant, is the Mount McKinley Building Workforce Housing Project. We've been working on this for several months, and it's going to develop 40 workforce housing units downtown. And we're hopeful it's going to provide a model for us to be able to do this with additional empty commercial space that's underutilized that we can turn into either workforce or market rate housing. That's just a picture of what it's going to look like inside in the micro units. This is something that's being done down in the States where they're creating these little micro units for workforce housing. And then we're working with Eklutna. They have, you probably are all very familiar with the Eklutna projects that they've got out in Eagle River. We've agreed to provide some gap funding for the project that is more shovel ready, I guess. And I'm sorry, I can't read the screen because I don't have my glasses, but we've agreed to help them with, they need some funding to get over the hump to provide for some infrastructure. And we've agreed to do that. We're currently in negotiations to finalize how that's going to all spill out. But it has the potential of starting up to 800 units of housing out in Eagle River, which is very exciting. And this is a kind of a breakout of this area to that's circled in blue here. It's a multi-phase project, but it gives you sort of a breakout, and it is in your handout as well, so you can take a look at it. And then we are also launching this summer the Great Streets Facade Improvement Program, and that's a partnership between ACDA, the Alaska Small Business Development Center, and Northrim Bank. And we are going to be making available at very reasonable interest rates and long-term loans to small businesses in the downtown and Muldoon area, specifically targeting the freeway to DeBar to try and improve the fronts of the stores and the small businesses so they can come in and they can redo their storefronts. One of the things, again, from Roger Brooks is he said we needed to increase the pedestrian experience and make our storefronts look better and more inviting. And so this program is specifically targeted. We put together $1 million we're going to dedicate. It's not all our money. We're also getting matched from the Small Business Development Center. And that's very exciting. So that's the projects we're going to use them for. Obviously, all of these projects, the need is much larger than the $5 million, but the money that we receive from the sale will seed these projects and give us the ability to go out and put together the P3 partnerships, finish the planning and the design and all the concepts. So if there's any questions, I'm glad to answer them.
Go ahead, Mr. Cross.
No, it's great to see some of these revitalization and expansion projects, but one of the things that keeps getting pushed off is some of our capital expenditures regarding our parking garages. I know that we've got some concrete deterioration and some repairs that need to be made. Can you speak a little bit about the plan to address those structural integrity issues in our parking garages?
Chair to Assemblymember Cross. So we have the agency, I'm not certain of the exact amount because I wasn't prepared to talk about capital projects today, but I don't believe there's been any major capital expenditures by the agency for the last 8 years or 9 years. And so we've been working very diligently to catch up on the maintenance at the garages for the last 2 years or so. There are issues with some of the garages, staircases. In fact, we'd put in for some of the ARPA funds. Some of the staircases are just wore out from washing them out from the homeless and from all of the, just things that happen inside the garages. And so we actually set aside last year, we started saving money for capital projects because we haven't earmarked $800,000 or so of this money has been earmarked to do capital improvements on the garages. And specifically, I could go into details about the concrete and the resurfacing and some of those things, but.
Any follow-up, Mr. Cross?
No, just that I know that the longer those put off, the more expensive it gets. It just deteriorates. Once you have fractures or fissures in the concrete, you get moisture intrusion, expansion and contraction. It begins to multiply as a multiplier. So whatever, let us know what we can do to work with you on that, because I know that delaying it is a multiplier effect on the expense of repair. So thank you.
You're welcome. It's a great example. If anybody wants to see what Mr. Cross is talking about, just park at the JCPenney garage. Because we don't do capital expenses there. That's JCPenney's responsibility, and there's not been any for a very, very, very long time.
Go ahead, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was wondering, just from other members who are here, and I know Meg isn't, do members have concerns about this project? And if so, what are they? Because let's get right to it, and then hopefully we can resolve those.
So one of the goals of this work session is to go through the S version, which, as I understand it, is a result of some of the questions from members. And so if there are no questions on Mr. Robbins' presentation at this point, I think we could probably move on. Thank you, Mr. Robbins.
Thank you.
And I do want to note that we were joined in person by Mr. Constant a few minutes ago.
Madam Chair, while they're getting the presentation up, can I ask a question? I know that one concern that members have highlighted, and it came up during Holton Hills, was sort of this general concern about the administration getting things done. And I personally understand the concern, but also don't think it's fair to use that on everything. I mean, there are a number of different employees doing different things. So can you speak to how this deal would happen and who would be responsible for a lot of it? And I don't know if that would allay if members are having those concerns, and I don't know if they are, but I think it would be nice to kind of try to reduce any concerns there.
Through the chair, Ms. Quinn Davidson, the S version is going to identify who's responsible for negotiating the deal, but we are going to bring on, Robin Ward has agreed to come under contract to review the deal. Hopefully we'll have that contract available to her next week, and then ideally a report to the Assembly and the administration on her perspective on the deal before you guys have a chance to vote on the 11th of April.
May I ask a follow-up? So Meg's not here, but I think this sort of stemmed from her concern. So would, in case she's listening later, would she be representing the ACDA or the municipality? Okay, the municipality, to ensure that the muni's concerned. Okay, everyone's nodding yes to the municipality in case you're wondering later, Meg.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. And I had just put myself in the queue just to note that in the case of Holton Hills, I think the vacancy of with Heritage Land Bank and the very prominent role of Heritage Land Bank was one of the issues. And I think that this is a different situation, especially with bringing Ms. Ward on contract. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. So I'm glad that we now have the S version before us because we haven't had it, though I've heard it exists. I looked briefly through the presentation and it references a purchase and sale agreement that's almost done. And we found ourselves in an interesting position now where we had an argument made that we signed a terrible lease. We accepted a terrible lease years ago that's going to be $65 million of cost, which seemed pretty extraordinary to me. And so if a good faith administration can make such a mistake, then I want to see the terms of that purchase and sale agreement. I want to understand what we're buying because I'm not buying a bad deal again, but I don't believe it was necessarily such a bad deal. We looked closely at the numbers and saw a whole different set of numbers. And so one thing we haven't seen until today, and I'm really grateful if this is here and this presentation is made, is what's the municipality's interest in this? We have up until today been presented a case by ACDA. This is what we want to do and why. And it never came with what does this mean to the municipality? And so it's easy to say, oh, we're going to save $65 million. We better do it. But what does it cost us? And so it's not $65 million. There's a lot going on here. We authorized the purchase for $14 million, AO 2018-46. ACDA borrowed $14.432 million to be paid off over 20 years at a 5.35 rate with an annual debt service of $1.228 million. The proposed AO 2022-104 would clear $14.432 million of financing from ACDA. In its place, it would authorize the municipality to borrow $20.3 million, an interest rate of 5.36 for 25 years, resulting in an annual payment of $1.483 million. Net effects of the proposed ordinance, the first one, we'll get the presentation on the S version here shortly. The annual debt service payments to the bank will increase by $225,000 and add an additional 9 years. Payments to the bank will be made from the muni, not ACDA, and the MOA will cease to be paying rent to ACDA. We currently pay $1.85 million. So ACDA will effectively secure a $6 million return on its purchase of 716 4th Avenue at the cost of the taxpayers. There are a series of policy questions here that have to be thought through. It's not just a simple deal that we should just say yes because there's a savings. It's a savings and a cost. We've never had the cost presented to us. And so policy question, is it worth increasing annual bank fees to give ACDA increased liquidity now? And that's a fair question. I think that's what you're presenting to us, Mr. Robbins. These things, is it a good investment? If the primary goal is to reduce the municipality's current payments, this could be done more cheaply, right? If it's an actual cost savings proposal, then there may be better ways to do it, requiring ACDA to pay a municipal dividend in the amount by which the rent payments are in excess, or simply amending the terms with ACDA. And then there's a question of how was the current sale price determined? Why isn't ACDA selling the building at something closer to what it paid, right? So we're effectively paying one side of our house profit for the raise in value for what we paid from the other side of our house for 5 years ago. So those are a lot of questions to ask, and it's unclear if ACDA is permitted to sell 17 West 4th Avenue to the Muni, but nothing precludes ACDA from selling the building for $1 or other deals.
Chris,
Yep,
may I ask him a question?
yep.
Sure.
Would
Go
it
ahead.
be
So
possible, I'm having a hard time like following everything you're saying, and I want to, would it be possible to ask one of your questions and then have them address it, and then we'll go back and forth? Because I feel like I'm getting a little lost, and I think you're just ahead of me on this
Here's
stuff.
what I'm trying to portray. Nobody has yet presented the actual cost to the municipality. What are the terms? So we have heard effectively that we're getting sunk because of a lease payment that we disagreed with. There are a lot of ways we could deal with that lease. If the question is, do we want to invest in ACDA's ability and leverage municipal finances to do it? It's not a sweet deal where we're just wiping off a debt and have magic money. We need the administration to present to us what the actual terms are. And now, hearing that Robin has been hired brings me great confidence because we have seen her work and know her work. And so I look forward to seeing her review and understanding the actual terms, because this thing's been around since November and we have never yet had a presentation of what's the actual cost. Now we hear in this document, and we'll see this presentation, that they've nearly finalized a purchase and sale agreement, which are the terms. And so maybe they now exist. That's the gist. I have the amortization tables and the various costs over the years for the various ways we would do this. So just know that we have a duty to understand the actual costs and not just what we're told. Yeah,
So after Mr. Constant wraps up, I
that's
have
fine.
I have Mr. Voland in the queue, and then we already went to, yeah, okay, and then Mr. Cross. So go ahead, Mr. Voland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering, in the negotiation process, how did we get to the $18.3 million figure? Who from the administration was involved in the negotiations?
And I believe that is part of what is going to be addressed as we talk about the S version. Is that correct, Ms. Peterson, Mr. Trombley? Okay. It's my understanding, Mr. Voland, we'll get to that. I mean, we can jump to that. How do you want to proceed?
No, that's fine. If we're gonna get there, that's fine. If I could ask another question, then.
Sure.
So, is the building going to be appraised by a certified appraiser at some point? And then one other question is, if we don't do this, what are ACDA's other options? Can ACDA give APD 3 months notice and say, lease is over and we're going to sell it to somebody else at market price? And if those are addressed in the presentations, that's great. If we want to get answers now, that would be good too.
Thank you, Mr. Voland. Mr. Robbins, do you want to take that question about ACDA's options?
Through the chair, Mr. Voland, or Assemblymember Voland. So if I may address two of those issues. So the building was appraised when the when the purchase was originally done, I believe. And as we've gone through this process, we've offered several indicators of value of the building. We had an offer for $22 million from a real estate trust to purchase the building. The building is currently been assigned a $37 million replacement value by the insurance company that we pay insurance on. And anecdotally, and I'm the seller, so of course I'm going to paint a good picture, but the building is really worth around $25 to $27 million on the marketplace. And we're confident that were we to move to sell this to a party that wasn't the municipality, that's the price we would ask for it in that neighborhood, at least as a starting price. So That just speaks a little bit to the value. And the last question was, I'm sorry, could you ask, I missed something?
Yes, I don't think that ACDA would do this.
The tax appraisal on the building is
But-
17.9, by the way. So you're buying
The tax,
just
okay, thank
the tax appraisal.
thank you. My other question was, and I don't believe ACDA would do this, but if they wanted to, could they kick APD out in 3 months and sell it to another party?
To the chair, to Assemblymember Bolin, no, we wouldn't, nor could we, by the terms of the lease, kick APD out of the building. So that's not something that we could do.
Go ahead, Ms. Ennis.
Yeah.
I mean, what is
Deanna's-
the notice required to be given?
Can I just say, I was the drafter of the crappy lease, and I'm here to explain the context, should you have questions, because I don't consider it a mistake at all. But I do know that particular answer right away is that no, APD cannot terminate the lease under any condition except default, and then MOA APD has the right to cure within 90 days or whatever time period. So no, MOA is totally in control of those 20 option periods. So no, ACDA cannot terminate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ennis and Mr. Robbins and Mr. Volin. Mr. Cross?
So the current lease in place, is it a triple net like they lease, but then they also cover all maintenance expenses, utilities, or what is the aggregate?
This is actually in the slide, the deck
Oh,
too.
was
So we're going to go through the slides real quick now. Yes, so right now the lease states that APD is responsible for all of the operation and the maintenance costs, janitorial and all those, and ACDA is only responsible for large capital expenses.
Okay, so, and I guess one thing is, and yes, I agree with Chris that it'd be good to be able to see the economic effect. Just understand that the current lease that we have in place, since it's adjustable and it's tied to CIP or CPI, then, the rates at which it was originally assumed were probably a really good deal. But in the current economic development, it's not such a great deal anymore. So, I mean, things change. The second part is by purchasing it, we accomplish two things. One, we get into a fixed rate product, okay, as opposed to a lease. We also get principal reduction. And at 5.3%, that's significantly below what is currently in commercial loans. The Wall Street Journal Prime is hovering around 6.5%, 7%. It's normally 1.25% above that. So we're lower than residential rates for this. So that's a really good rate if we're getting into a fixed term product, plus we're getting principal reduction. And I guess my only question is, the only thing we would pick up would be, we would now be liable perhaps for the capital expense on it. I guess we'd have to take a look what that aggregate is. But the way I look at it is this allows us as a municipality to refinance it. Yes, we got to come up with some capital up front, but again, what is the long-term savings? We're getting principal reduction out of that product. We're buying it below market value at a rate that is below market rate. And then what is the long-term cost savings? And so when I say crappy lease, when it was originally formed, it was probably a magnificent lease, but considering that it's like an adjustable rate mortgage, like when you first get into an adjustable rate mortgage, 4% seems really good. And now when it's like hovering around 8%, that doesn't seem like such a great deal. So when you've got those fluctuating, I think the other long-term benefit would be if we get into a fixed rate lease, whether that's slightly higher or slightly less, at least we can budget annually on what those payments are going to be, as opposed to the next year not knowing what that fluctuation and what the CPI is going to be, because every year we're going to be rolling the dice. Are we going to know what our payments are going to be out of pocket for the muni? So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Mr. Constant, and then I'd like to move on to the presentation.
Thanks. Other than the terms of the lease, which we could argue about whether they were good or not, or are, I agree with everything you just said. The building we stole, we got it so cheap that practically speaking, we could almost pay a whole lot more and still get a good deal. And that just gets to the rub that it's a policy question we have to make. But I don't think can make that policy question answerable until we have the full facts. And I just hope that through this presentation, we get the terms so that we understand what we're going to pay over what term of time and how it's going to work, so that we can judge the value of that question, not based on just a suggestion that it's right, but the facts.
Madam Chair, I have a policy question, just real quick. Is it, and you can tell me if this normally happens, that I wouldn't know. Is it normally the policy of the municipality to sell at a discount assets? Like this HLB, they don't normally just give land away at what they picked it up for. They sell it at market value even to another entity within the muni. Is it their responsibility to sell it for what they bought it for at a discount? Or between departments, do they normally stick to market value?
I think that the answer to that question, and people who've been here longer than me, like Robin, who's on the phone, could probably answer this better. But I think that it's a case specific question. And if there's a policy value that the assembly and administration agree to achieve, then it can be less than, it can be more than, it could be with special terms, longer terms. So it's a flexible question that gets answered on the terms of the specific deal before you.
And with that, go ahead, Ms. Peterson.
We will probably go through this really quickly just so that.
We haven't got there yet. It's only been 30 minutes.
Introduction. So obviously work session on the acquisition of 716. We're going to kind of highlight the current circumstances, which is the history. I think we've gone through it a couple of times, so I might breeze through it a little bit more. The proposed transaction, which I think is exactly what you guys want to get into, and then the conclusion. So the current circumstances, 716 was purchased by ACDA in 2018 using the leaseback financing. The then CFO at the time completed that transaction. The leaseback is a financing alternative commonly used by local governments to acquire capital assets. And after the purchase, ACDA then entered into a facility lease with APDA, which is currently existing at this time. The circumstances currently with ACDA is just short of $13 million in principal owing on their current financing with KeyBank. That debt service payment is a little over $1.2 million, and it exists until August 1st of 2033, at which time the interest rate resets to a 5-year rate and the lease ends on August 1st of 2038. The debt service on the ACDA loan is paid by the lease payment from APD. Lease payment is annual. We've talked about this. It increases annually by the CPI. The monthly lease payment began at $132,000. We are currently at $154,000, a total of $1.8 million annually for APD. We will see that increase for the CPI in October of 2023, based on the lease terms as they currently are. APD pays all the utility services, special assessments, and the MISA payment as well. The escalating lease payments tied to the CPI, which is an unusual term in a lease agreement, which at this point with inflation is detrimental to the municipal taxpayers, as they do see those increases in APD's lease costs when we have to increase those in their budgets. The condition creates a loan payment similar to an adjustable rate mortgage where the payment amount has no cap. And then the proposed transaction. So this was the original document, and you guys now have an S version. So we will go through those in the next couple of slides. So the first concept is the negotiation of a purchase and sale agreement. This negotiation has been completed and a purchase sale agreement is in near final form, ready to be signed. No further action is required by the mayor or the municipal manager or acting municipal manager regarding the price. The municipality is entering into a contract with a third-party real estate consultant. Mr. Trombley had explained that, so we are contracting with Ms. Ward, who is going to come on and review the transaction and give us the analysis and present us with whether or not we need any changes in that. Additionally, the municipality will submit by the assembly information memorandum the third-party real estate consultant's analysis. So you guys will be able to see that as well. The purchase price for the facility is $18 million. All right. The second concept is the financing. The acquisition of the facility, the expertise to execute the financing of the acquisition lies with our CFO, Grant Utrinka, our bond counsel, Cynthia Weed, the Public Finance Division staff, KeyBank bankers, legal counsel to KeyBank, risk manager, our Department of Law, and the U.S. Bank staff, as the trustee, have the expertise to complete the financing of the acquisition. The majority of those people have been on staff and were involved in the original leaseback transaction when ACDA purchased it. And Cynthia Weed is responsible for writing the financing documents along with KeyBank's counsel. The following sections have been added to the S version for clarification. So the purchase price of the building, $18 million. The financing cost shall be paid for with the proceeds of the ground lease, net to the purchase price of $18 million. The responsibility of managing the process to acquire the facility is delegated to the municipal manager, which is consistent with the previous document, is hereby authorized to sign all documents on behalf of the municipality for the acquisition of the facility, except for documents that requires the signature of the municipal attorney or the risk manager. Within 60 days of the closing of the acquisition, the municipality will report to the municipal assembly via an AIM the final terms of the acquisition. And then the section 25.35.060 of the Anchorage Municipal Code requires that the assembly approve ACDA to sell real property with a value over $6 million, and the municipal assembly authorizes ACDA to do that. So upon completion of the proposed transaction, there will be very little, if any, impact on municipal departments. The Anchorage Police Department is already responsible for the operation and maintenance costs of the facilities. That includes the utilities, the janitorial maintenance of the building. APD would pay the insurance premium directly to the insurer rather than reimbursing ACDA for the payment. All right, the proposed transaction. Do you have questions? Okay. The municipality will borrow $18.3 million from KeyBank. The forecasted closing date is August 31st of this year. The proceeds from the borrowing will be used to close as follows. The municipality will purchase the 716 building from ACDA. The purchase sale agreement is in near final term with a sale price of $18 million. The municipality will use the 716 building as collateral for a leaseback transaction with KeyBank. The terms and conditions of that are to be negotiated. The ACDA's current leaseback transaction, the loan to be prepaid in full using proceeds from the municipality's proposed leaseback transaction with KeyBank. The existing prepayment penalty in ACDA's lease will be waived by KeyBank. And the pledged collateral under the 2018 leaseback transaction will be released back to ACDA. Okay. Okay. So the conclusion is we believe the municipality's purchase of the 716 building from ACDA will be in the best interest of the municipality's taxpayers. It'll eliminate a lease payment to ACDA that has no cap on the payment amount to be paid by the municipality. The MOA will have an annual fixed payment to the lender for the use of the 716 building for APD's headquarters. The loan payment will be based upon tax-exempt current market rates. The MOA will have annual savings for the taxpayers for the next 15 years, and the MOA will own the 716 building at the end of the lease. And again, the closing date is expected to be around August 31st of this year. And we made it.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. So first is Ms. Quinn Davidson, and then I'm in the queue, and then Mr. Volan, and then Mr. Constant, and then Mr. Cross. Anyone else? All right, go ahead, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Excuse me. I'm trying to absorb all this, so I might need you to talk me through it a little bit. I originally was thinking that you were planning to use SEMT money, which now, since it's FY23, I assume is just fund balance. But I understand that the administration believes that we have a negative fund balance, and we haven't had that conversation fully, but I think a lot of us probably maybe disagree. But my question was going to be, how would we spend that money if you think we have a negative fund balance? But can you walk me through again some of these steps and then maybe tie to to the other question I just asked? Thank you.
Yeah, so originally what we were going to do is in order to provide a down payment to ACD, we were going to use the SEMT funds to fund that. And then we were going to finance the costs afterwards, but in order to get the down payment. And originally that was in November, but because of the timeline we're in right now and with the SEMT funds and with the negative fund balance, those don't exist anymore. The SEMT funds rolled into fund balance. And so we're not proposing to use any of those SEMT funds, and we're not proposing to provide an in advance down payment. We're just going to finance the full cost of the purchase.
Can we just talk about this a little more? I was trying to
Okay.
find the page and then I got lost and then I tried to catch up and then I got confused. So
Is it this one?
I think it's page 13.
Okay.
So you're going to fully finance it, not put any money down. And then can you just talk me through this slide a little bit?
And I actually am going to refer to Ben or finance in order to get into those
Thank
details.
you.
Yep.
All right, and Ben Bowman, Assistant Municipal Attorney, through the chair to Member Austin Quinn Davidson. And we also have Cynthia Weed on the phone, who has more of the direct relationship with Key, but I'm monitoring this portion of things for the municipality. So the cost to the municipality, the gross cost of purchasing the building is $18 million. We'll provide that to ACDA, and then out of that will come, and that's the amount that we pay to them. They're covering all closing costs. The financing cost, which has been projected by finance to be about $300,000. So we'll be taking a lease back, which is,
Can I stop you? I'm already
Please.
confused. So I thought you said that you were not putting cash anywhere, the 18 million, but you just said you're going to give the $18 million to ACDA. That would be buying it versus financing, right?
well, so because of how financing and buying a capital project works for a municipality, we can't take a mortgage. But what we can do is we can buy something outright. We can then lease the item to a bank. They then lease it back to us. And that's a way for us to turn a capital asset into cash, which we can then use
So where are you getting the $18 million to buy it?
from Key Bank. The value of the lease that we offer to them is $18 million. So we lease a building to them, they pay us $18 million. Then they lease it back to us, and that is the fixed annual payment that we make, is the lease back to them.
Okay.
We need a picture.
It's like this, I think is the picture. Okay, and just one other question, which is, and I'll just have to think about this more and figure it out. So other people, I think, get it, so I don't want to slow things down. So, or at least two other people get it. I don't know about the other quiet ones. What is this overall for this project? What are the savings? Like, why would the muni want to do it? What are we gaining?
In the actual savings of the, so we
Was that
updated-
on one of the slides?
It's not on one of the slides, but in the S version, we updated the C.
Okay.
And so that's attached in your documentation. And so what you'll notice is that the expectation is that the APD rent goes up next year based on CPI. So we'll go up to 1.9 million. And then the expectation of our financing cost for debt service would be 1.3. So you're going to see roughly in 2024 would be a $570,000 savings. And then each year in that C, you'll notice with the increases in the expected CPI, that change based on the lease would increase, but because our financing is fixed, it wouldn't. And so each year is a additional savings. Yeah.
Can I ask one more question, Madam Chair? So because that lease has that fluctuating payment or, based on CPI,
Yep.
it's theoretical that it could go up, it could go down. No.
No,
Okay.
even I believe, and Ben can correct me on the lease, but even if the CPI is a negative, I don't believe our payment goes down. I think it would just stay stationary for that year. So it would be the same as if the CPI was 0. And so we don't actually see from one year to the next where it would be 1.9. And then if it was a negative number, it would go down.
The lease never goes back.
Yeah.
Wow. Now I see why Kevin's not a fan of it. Okay. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks. Poor Dee. She's like, let me defend myself. I don't know anything about what I'm talking about, so I'm sure you're right and I'm wrong.
Thanks. I am next in the queue, and I have a few questions, and thanks for pointing out the C. I thought that 1.353 number was actually based on that original $20 million proposed price. Okay, that's the new amount. And so the muni would pay 1.353 to KeyBank, and right now ACDA pays 1.228 million to KeyBank. So the muni would be taking on a higher cost with this arrangement. And so that higher cost would be, APD would pay it through IGC for their lease, I would assume.
It's not, we're not swapping what ACDA pays and what we pay. ACDA pays based on the lease terms that they had. And so it would be like they're paying their part off to KeyBank. And then the municipality is having our own financing, and that's
Right.
where our debt service would start. And so what we would do is we would budget the debt service payment in APD's budget, but we wouldn't budget it as high as what their lease payment currently is. So right now we budget $1.8 million for them to cover their current lease payment. We would only need to budget $1.3 million for them to make a debt service payment for the financing of the purchase.
Okay, but the bottom line is, even with the reduced price of 18 million, the muni still will pay more to KeyBank than what ACDA is paying now. 1.35 million for debt service versus 1.22 for debt service.
Correct.
Okay, so so I'm tracking that part, and I guess as far as the goals, on the one hand, reduce APD's lease payment, which we're ACDA and the muni, two municipal entities, some flexibility with doing business with each other, and so one scenario would be just to change the terms of the lease. So that would be one option. But the second part of the goal is to increase the liquidity for ACDA. And I like the projects. I think it's really exciting what ACDA is doing. And I think it goes back to Mr. Constant's point that that's a policy decision, and that very well may be worth the additional cost. And so I wanted to mention that piece because, again, I agree with the policy aspect. And then I wanted to ask Ms. Ennis, since you worked on it, can you talk a little bit about how you landed on the structure of the lease?
Yes, this is Deanna through the chair. Historically, MOA APD wanted this building. ACDA wanted nothing to do with it. We had to begrudgingly talk them into it. And after much negotiation, the basic concept was simply that they would have no risk involved. And that's why you see some of the one-sided terms in that lease, because they were to come out whole. They didn't really want to do this anyway. They come out whole. The lease payment was slightly higher than their financing payments until the runaway CPI. But we were going to make them whole, and that they would never have any risk. And that's, again, why you see the one-sided thing. The other idea was that we would, MOA, would buy it as soon as we could. And it took a long time to build up some equity in that property. We also had to do a charter change because MOA could not do the sale leaseback transaction. We did a number of code provisions in the pre-2018. MOA could terminate ACDA, just terminate them. Well, that didn't sit well with the bondholders. So we had a whole series of pieces of legislation that had to go in, including that charter change. So we couldn't have done this transaction in 2018, just MOA. We couldn't have done it on our own. We needed them. They did not need us. They were not pleased with this transaction, but we made it as safe for them as we could. If I could add one thing, over the last 5 years, finance has come to us half a dozen times, to myself, and then also Ralph DeWare, who was our top commercial attorney at the time, and then Ben, with ideas. And we had to veto them every time because they didn't meet state constitutional debt limitations. And all sorts, it's actually fairly complicated. This is sort of a nice, easy way out. We finally have enough equity in that property, the MOA, to be involved in the financing.
Thanks, Ms. Ennis. And I remember that. I remember when the property came on the market and the municipality needed to be agile. And at the time, I thought that was really great how, and I still think so, I mean, how it got worked out so that through the arrangement with ACDA, we had access to this building. So I also remember that we were going to come back to it as well because it took up a lot of ACDA resources. And so I guess I would say, I am for maximizing the good however we can, you know, on the muni side, on the ACDA side, and, you know, whatever it takes to get there. So next in the queue is Mr. Voland.
Thank you. I'm kind of circling back to one of my earlier questions about the lease and whether, you know, ACDA's options to not renew it. I'm going to read the language right here, and if Dee wants to clarify, she can. But it says, tenants shall have the option to extend this lease for 19 one-year extension terms upon all terms and conditions set forth herein, except rent shall increase by the CPI each year. Renewal will be automatic unless either party gives the other party not less than 3 months written notice of non-renewal prior to the expiration of the then current lease term. So, unless my interpretation is wrong, and maybe some of the stuff needs to be dumbed down for me, ACA does at some point have the option to not renew another year, provided they give that 3 months notice. Is that correct?
Ms. Ennis?
Yeah, that certainly wasn't the intent of the provision, and there's case law that supports when you put in the language, tenant shall have the option, they can enforce that option. It's all in the tenant's ballpark. So that other non-renewal that really, the ACDA doesn't have that power because the tenant's right to renew overrides that. And there's case law supporting that.
Interesting. Why are we going with KeyBank? Did we consider multiple proposals and they were the best deal, or is it because we have to go with KeyBank?
I believe Ross is going to answer.
Hi, this is Ross Roosevelt, Madam Chair. Mr. Voland, KeyBank is our banking relationship.
Could you speak up a
KeyBank
little
is-
bit closer to the microphone?
KeyBank
Thanks.
is our banking services contractor. We have a long relationship with them, and we've developed a great relationship with them with regard to their bankers, the bankers on our bank accounts, the bankers that loan us money on the bank side, and with their investment bankers. I have solicited other banks that didn't really have an interest in this transaction. One banker, local bankers, believe that that banker wanted the general obligation of the municipality, which only comes with a vote of the voters. And this was a transaction that we can do without a vote of the voters because the charter change that Deanna's referred to. So we expect that we'll execute this transaction with Key Bank. However, if there is a reason that that doesn't happen, the document is written so that we can seek another commercial bank to complete a transaction similar to this with another commercial bank.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I think it is, interesting just to consider, are we getting the best deal, best interest rate, when it comes to bank fees, how much money can we save in the municipality? And then I guess just one last question, if it's okay. What's stopping us from getting a certified appraisal?
Through the chair, Mr. Volin, your question is what's stopping us from getting an appraisal?
Correct.
There isn't
a new appraisal.
There isn't anything stopping us from purchasing and obtaining a new appraisal on the property.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Volin. Mr. Robbins, did you want to add something?
Through the chair to my member Voland, the only thing I would say is that in code it says that the municipality needs to pay fair market value, and if we were to get an appraisal closer to that larger number, we would have to, I just would say that it might be something to consider, because if we appraised at 27 million and you only paid 18 million, is that fair market value? That's something to consider.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Constant, then Mr. Cross, and then Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Yeah, thank you. And I don't think anybody who's in real estate would consider the purchase price below or above the value. It's for sure a screaming deal in the context of the cost to purchase the building. When the legislature built it or had it upgraded, they spent $30-some million to do it. That building is worth a ton of money. So while having an appraisal might be interesting, it's just, I would suggest you could just concede that the price is fine. That's really not the issue. But to each their own, right? You have to sort through the values for yourself. And I have a couple of questions that relate to the terms of the deal. So in real estate transactions after 2008, residential in particular, you had to provide with TILA report, like a truth in lending, a document that shows all of the costs and how it amortizes, so that anybody who looks at that document can understand what the terms and costs are. We've had it asserted that $300,000 is the debt cost, but then we also had it asserted that $1.7 million is the financing cost. Until we see it, we don't know. We have no idea what these costs are, and it's not in any of these documents that I can grasp. And so at one point here, it states that the terms are to be negotiated. So when are those terms negotiated? We are being asked to approve a term that says one of these new additional sections, notwithstanding prior. No, that's not it. Where's the one that says that we authorize the sale of this building? If we approve this ordinance, authorize the sale, and then you negotiate the terms, how is that a sensible transaction for the assembly to do?
Graham Trinka, CFO, through the chair, Mr. Constant. It's not atypical. You have approved that the final negotiations with the lending agents through the CFO in the past. The term sheet outlines the terms that KeyBank has, although it has expired, has said they would continue to honor. And so those are the ones we would negotiate on.
And so the current trend with our relationship with the executive is one of skepticism, and yet we're being asked to approve terms that we haven't seen. And so I'm concerned about that. That's my first concern.
The term sheet is in the S version of the document.
Where?
Sorry, behind the C.
And I want to just do a quick time check. We actually were only scheduled until 12:50 and it's 12:54. Our next work session starts at 1 p.m. I believe we have 2 hours scheduled for that one. So we might have a little bit, or actually an hour and a half scheduled for that one. So we might have a little bit of wiggle room to go over if need be.
Yeah, I have another question. So it's going to take some time to chew on what this says. Where in this term sheet does it state even the length of the loan that we're authorizing? Because in none of these documents so far is it presented that this is a 18-year, 20-year, 25-year deal. And when we're calculating the difference of cost and the value over time, we need to understand simple things like the monthly, the annual, the finance, and the terms, the length of the loan. So I guess the chair is nodding or elbowing me that maybe we need more time to have a conversation offline. Again, I'm super grateful to hear that Ms. Ward as a third party can come in and help kind of punctuate the information. I would like a basic document, like we did our best with just my team, which you should always check my math, of on the first version, not the S version, demonstrating the cost of the loan, demonstrating the cost of the lease payments, and then doing our own assessment of the costs and values. But it's not accurate anymore because the terms that we have are now different. And so I think that bottom line is we need just more information until we can make a yes vote on this, or even get to the policy question. And I'm not against it. Again, I'm coming in hot because for 2 months, I've been trying to figure out what the financing costs and how this deal is structured and what the deal is. That's it. And we've only seen half the deal until today. And I look forward to being able to make sense of these terms now that they're presented. But I still don't know. Are we proposing to pay Northrim Bank for 20 years, for 30 years?
Mr. Constant and Ms. LaFrance, all the questions that you've just recited here are answered in the documents that were delivered to you just recently by Ms. Peterson. So we understand and recognize that perhaps you haven't had time to review them, but the question, once you take additional time as your suggestion, which we certainly support, you'll find the answers there. And, if there's some question about representations in these documents, we're certainly available to answer those questions.
So the simple first one, and then I'll relinquish the floor, is what is the length of the deal we're proposing to make with Northrim? Is it 25 years? It says there's numbers here, 35, 25, 10.
If you look on page, we have a term sheet dated as of October 27th, 2022 from KeyBank. It's a draft, it's a term sheet that they proposed to us back in October of last year, which by the way was good for 45 days or 90 days and it's expired, but the terms would be the same if they came back to us, perhaps with the difference of an interest rate. But on the bottom of that, the maturity date of the agreement will be not more than 25 years.
Okay.
So in our analysis, we've used a 25-year term on the for our analytical analysis of this. And if you could turn to top of page 2 of 5, there's an interest rate there, and depending on which term we select, there's a slight difference. 20-year term interest rate of 5.39% versus a 25-year term with an interest rate of 5.48%. Again, those interest rates are subject to current market rates were we to continue to engage KeyBank with this transaction.
So just
Thank
one
you.
last calculation.
We're going to have to move on here.
3 times 20.
We'll come back to your calculation,
So
okay?
that's $34 million.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Ms. Dern, since she hasn't spoken yet, and then I still have Mr. Cross, Ms. Quinn Davidson. I was in the queue, but I can take myself out. Go ahead, Ms. Dern.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a quick question. If I'm reading it correctly, at 15 years, though, then there can be an upward adjustment to the interest rate. Is that correct?
Ms. LaFrance, Ms. Dern, would you say that again, please?
It looks to me, and I might be reading it incorrectly, that regardless of whether we pick the 20 or the 25-year term, the upward adjustment to the interest rate could occur at 15 years?
What page are you on?
I'm looking actually at I'm on 205.
I think it's the third paragraph under interest rate section.
The third paragraph under interest rate, page 2?
Yeah.
Right. Well, we asked them for quotes on a 20-year term and a 25-year term, and they gave us quotes at that time, and the quote was 5.39 for a 20-year term and 5.48 for a 25-year term. Now, what you're looking at, and now I'm catching up to you,
Thank you.
is those interest rates were for 15-year rates, okay? So they gave us the benefit of a shorter interest, a shorter term, an interest rate for a shorter term, but after 15 years, we would reset the interest rate. So if we selected the 20-year term, we'd have a 15-year interest rate of 5.39. At the end of 15 years, we would reset the rate, but it would be for a 5-year rate, which would be the remaining 5 years of the 20-year term. Same thing on the other one. If we select a 25-year term, they're going to give us a 15-year interest rate. At that time, it was 5.48. Then after 15 years, we would reset the rate based on current interest rate environment and a benchmark and for the next 10 years. So then we get a 10-year rate. So we're borrowing for 25 years, and the first 15 years is a 15-year interest rate. And the last 10 years, it would be for a 10-year interest rate. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dern. Mr. Cross?
I'm good. Just keep it brief. My numbers say this property currently operates about an 8.7 cap rate with their current lease in place at an $18 million to $25 million sale. I'm sure somebody will buy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Brevity award. Ms. Quinn Davidson?
I don't know what he's talking about, but that's okay. So I was wondering on page 3 of the AM, but Kevin says I'm wrong. I was wondering if it's reasonable to assume that CPI will continue to increase by that much in the next 5 years. So in the budget and savings impact estimate, just given where we are, I thought we wouldn't go way higher, but I really set him off over here. He's very excited, showing me all kinds of articles and things. So I think maybe you agree that it's going to continue to go up.
I mean, I think that it's unlikely that it is going to go down. And even if it stays zero, I think that originally when we had turned in an AIM with some different scenarios. And so the fact that our current lease is more than what our debt service would be anyways, even if the CPI stayed zero for the rest of the next 20 years, we're still going to be saving millions of dollars.
Is this S version already submitted?
No, so this is a draft of it,
Okay.
and we will submit it in, obviously in time for the April 11th meeting, but we wanted to have time if there was anything that came out of the
Yeah.
discussions to be able to address other questions or issues that might have come up.
Would you consider maybe putting a sentence in here that said, you know, even if CPI stayed flat over the next 5 years, this is how much we'd save. If it continues to go up at this rate, this is just so we have kind of that range.
Yep.
Okay,
We can put
awesome.
in there, we can just take from the previous AIM and just put a
Great.
couple of sentences in.
Perfect. And then
Yeah.
one more quick question, and if we're running out of time, you guys could follow up with me later, but just wondering whether taking out this $18 million loan impacts our ability to do other loans or get other financing, like for instance, for the port or other projects that we're doing. Thanks.
Do do you want to take that one as a follow-up for later?
Ms.
Okay.
LaFrance and Ms. Quinn Davidson, it does not impact our future borrowing capabilities.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. And I had put myself in the queue, and then there's Mr. Constant, and then we'll wrap up. And what I had wanted to ask when I was asking about the increased annual payment of 1.35 to KeyBank versus now it's 1.22 is the point Mr. Constant raised, that we are going from 15 years remaining at, well, ACDA is 1.22 annually to 25 years at 1.35 for the muni. And so that cost needs to be reflected against any kind of savings to APD.
Well, ACDA they have their revenues coming in from parking garages and lots and not taxpayers. And so the taxpayers will continue to see whatever the cost APD has for their lease. And so although KeyBank is going to see as our financing agency that change, the municipality, the ACDA's financials are not part of the municipalities. And so we budget for what APD owes on the lease. And so taxpayers will only see the difference in the reduction from the lease cost to our financing costs. There's no change from what ACDA was paying because they are a separate entity. This is just a separate loan.
Right, I understand that. I mean, the APD lease figure is kind of arbitrary and a little bit abstract because it could theoretically be easily changed. And so what I'm getting at is the municipality would be taking on a greater payment to KeyBank over a longer period of time. And so I know we're out of time, and I think that's one of the things that could be laid out. And maybe I'm not communicating that great, but I'll go to Mr. Constant for a final word, and then we'll wrap up.
I have much the same question on page 15 of your slide deck. The 1, 2, 3, 4th bullet states the MOA will have annual savings for the taxpayers for the next 15 years, but the term of the loan is 25 years. And so it just really, for me, what I need to see is the complete financial picture without the arbitrary or very real even distinction between the fact that we have two financial statements and two, because they're both the family of the municipality and we're being asked to move money from one to another and proposing some savings, but it's based on a lease that's effectively adjustable by us. We hold the terms. They can't sell the building without our approval. So it's not like they can just go put it on the market. And so I want to see a complete financial picture with the terms in a way that is communicated for dummies. And because that's what I need to be able to feel confident. I know the moving parts. Now, again, you have a new contractor coming on who has made herself an expert in communicating to dummies. And so I look forward to seeing her do that for us because I want to get to yes, and I will when I have the full picture.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Well said. And I just want to thank you all for your work on the S version and your willingness to be iterative in this process. And as Dee knows, that's how it goes, just based on our conversation yesterday with another project. So thank you for your work, and I feel optimistic that we can get there with what we're all just wanting to see. So thank you so much. And with that, we are adjourned.